Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Southern California Water Dialogue. We're going to wait just a couple minutes while we invite all of our attendees into our session, and then we'll get started.
Hello, everybody. We're going to get started in just a little while. Okay, welcome everyone. This is the Southern California Water Dialogue. I'm going to say what everyone says at some point on Zoom. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Connor. And I have a brief announcement when you're ready.
You do? Go ahead, start.
Yes, I just wanted to let our audience know that our chat function is disabled today for some reason. We don't generally use the chat function. We focus on the Q&A function, so it probably won't be an issue, but just wanted to make sure people were aware before we get started.
Thank you, Dee. Just technology is not always perfect, and neither are we. So my name is Connor Everts. I am co-chair with Dee Zink of the Southern California Water Dialogue. Thank you all for joining us. I will be doing the moderation and a short introduction. And then Dee will take care of the question and answer period, or what we call our dialogue, afterwards, where you will send questions and you have the opportunity to upvote as well. There'll be instructions on that as well. I want to thank our steering committee, who's listed now on the screen, for their participation and help on pulling these together. I also want to let you all know that we're always looking for subjects, and you're welcome to contact us with those. Kathy Caldwell is our erstwhile coordinator and has been for a long time. She actually hit the road today, so she won't be with us today, but she was organizing our rehearsal on Monday, and she always pulls these together, so I want to give her full credit. So here are the ground rules. We're not using the chat feature, as you were just told. If you have any technical difficulties, you can email Joanne Carrillo, who sent out the announcement, I guess. To ask a question, again, you're going to use the Q&A, type in a question, and click send We can upvote as well. If you have a poor connection, move closer to your wireless router and, all right, and turn off the video if you're having a problem as well. Please mute. You'll be automatically muted, and the rest of us will mute when we're not speaking as well. You'll be unmuted when you need, if there's the opportunity, but the questions will be asked by Dee and then answered by a panelist. We run about 60 minutes. I know Tracy Quinn's, like everybody working in conservation, is going to be very busy, so we're going to try to give time up front for her questions at the end of the presentations. All right, again, here's a graphic out with the Zoom webinar, how to hit Q&A. Type in the questions. You can use an upvote by thumb to moving that question to the top of the list if you so desire. Again, here's our agenda. It's straightforward. We miss you all being in person. We will be perhaps a hybrid into the future, but thank you for attending. Today, our speakers, we have their bios listed as well. So with that, I'm going to do a short introduction and a little background. You know, we have some regulars who have been coming to the dialogue for many years. We have some since COVID who are able to join us without having to travel downtown, and others who, you know, we've got an opportunity to spread our audience. So please let others know about these programs as well if you like them. If you don't like them, you can complain to me. With that, I want to say that we are in very interesting times in water as well as other subjects. We are looking at, you know, record heat, record dry. Most of the rest of the state is in a drought declaration from the governor. There's a voluntary 15% being requested. In Northern California, the situation is more dire. In Southern California, we seem to have water in storage. There's some questions if everyone called on Lake Mead at the same time, how long that could last. If we continue with climate change driven drought extremes, we may find ourselves in a very different situation in a shorter amount of time, as Lake Mead just hit the historic record low since it first filled in 1937. We get a large percentage of our water from the Colorado River through Met. In Southern California, we get about 30% of Southern California's water through the State Water Project, which is down to a 5% allocation. A lot of you know some of this information, but we'd like to have the discussion on what Southern California has done to invest and become more independent. Some areas across Southern California, the city of Riverside with a large aquifer. I live in Santa Monica, where we're fortunate enough to have an aquifer that we're cleaning up and are looking towards water independence of imported water by 2023. And there are other areas across Southern California that are independent of other sources. The rest are dependent of those sources. So how we use them into the future and how we maximize them and what kind of projects it takes to do that are all open for discussion. And then conservation and the discussion whether it continues to be voluntary and mandatory. This is a discussion we won't finish today, but we hope to start it and answer your questions as well. With that, I want to thank Mike Markus for starting out, and he's going to give our first presentation from the Orange County Water District. Take it away, Mike.
Thank you very much, Connor. Pleasure to be here today. And what I will talk about is what we're doing down here in Orange County with our groundwater basin and our goal to strive for water supply reliability and resiliency. Next slide, please. So the Orange County Water District, very briefly, we were formed by the state in 1933. We're a special district. Our goal in life is to manage a groundwater basin, protect our rights to the Santa Ana River. We provide groundwater to 19 municipal and special water districts, retail water agencies. So you can look at us as wholesalers of groundwater. We provide groundwater to 2.5 million people. And right now, the basin supplies 77% of the total water demands for those 19 retail water agencies in North and Central Orange County. Next slide. Cross-section of the groundwater basin. We are a coastal aquifer. We are connected to the ocean. You can see on the left-hand side of the slide, the shallow aquifer is connected to the ocean. Back in the late 70s, we built a project called Water Factory 21, first project in the world to use reverse osmosis to treat wastewater. We took that water, that highly purified water, injected into the seawater barrier to keep the seawater from contaminating that aquifer. And we do actively manage this groundwater basin. Next slide. So our different sources of water, kind of a busy slide, but going left to right, we do receive Santa Ana River flows. Strangely enough, the Santa Ana River is probably one of very few rivers in Southern California that has flown a year round. And the reason why is because in the upper Santa Ana watershed, those cities discharge their highly treated wastewater into the Santa Ana River. It flows downstream, and we capture it in our groundwater basin. We actually have an adjudicated right of 42,000 acre feet. 2 flows in the Santa Ana River, and they're currently at 70,000 acre feet a year. A few years ago, they were 150,000 acre feet, but the upper watershed has been doing a nicer job of recycling their water in the upper watershed, so they're discharging less to the river. Prado Dam, we do capture stormwater. We have an agreement with the Corps of Engineers to store stormwater behind the dam and then slowly release it downstream. Local rainfall, when it does rain, that water absorbs into the ground and into the basin. We do purchase a certain amount of imported water also. So we will purchase untreated met water, saving the cost of treatment, the treatment cost, and recharge that into the basin so that we can maintain that high percentage of pumping. And then we have GWRS, Groundwater Replenishment System, recycled water. We made a commitment to this a couple decades ago, and it currently supplies about 103,000 acre feet of water a year as a direct supply into the basin. So it currently provides about 1/3 of the supply into the groundwater basin. Next slide. As far as the sources of water, this graphic just shows kind of over time how the various sources of supply into the basin have increased or decreased. And if you take a quick look at it, you can see the natural recharge or rainfall on the bottom. That goes up and down. We know that. Those of us that have lived in California our entire lives know that it's not uncommon to have up to 7 years of below average, followed by a couple of years of above average rainfall. The problem is those dry years are becoming more severe and the wet years are becoming more severe also, which makes it a challenge. So you can see on the right-hand side, a couple of very low years of rainfall back to back. Santa Ana River flows have bounced up and down. I mentioned that they're declining because there's more recycling going in the upper watershed. And then you can see in 2008, that dark blue bar, Groundwater Replenishment System, that's when we went into operation with that recycled water facility. And as I said, it currently supplies about 1/3 of the water supply into the basin. Why is that important? It gives us water supply reliability. So it gives us a drought-proof source that we can rely on even if drought does persist. Next slide. A little picture also of the groundwater basin and the overdraft. So 0 is a full basin, minus 500,000 acre feet is the range that we like to work in. If we went below minus 500,000 acre feet, we would start probably having problems such as subsidence, and we don't want to do that. So we manage within. And you can see it was full in 1969, a very wet year, followed by a drought. So those are the declining flows into the basin. And you can kind of track wet versus drought by the graph of the basin. What's interesting is in the last few years, the last 10 years or so, even though we've had extreme changes as far as minimum amounts of rainfall followed by large amounts of rainfall, it's kind of dampened, if you will, those extremes, and that's because of our use of recycled water. Next slide. So the groundwater replenishment, for those of you that don't know, it's 100 million gallon per day advanced purification facility. So we purify water that otherwise would be discharged to the ocean. The Orange County Sanitation, or OC-SAN, are our partners. They're next door. They take the industrial and domestic waste from basically the same service area, treat it to secondary standards where it's then safe to discharge to the ocean. But we treat it as a resource, not a waste. And so we intercept it before it goes to the ocean, run it through an advanced purification, such that we've turned that secondary effluent basically into distilled water. As I mentioned before, currently at 100 MGD, 103,000 acre feet per year, enough water for about 850,000 people. We have been operational. We started in January 2008 with our first project, which was a 70 MGD project. We turned around and we decided to do our initial expansion. We added another 30 million gallons per day in May of 2015. And we're currently constructing our final expansion. So we have the ability to expand another 30 MGD. We're in the process of doing that. We will be complete the first quarter of 2023. At that point in time, we will be producing 130 million gallons per day. And in fact, we will be producing or taking all of the available wastewater, the non-reclaimable wastewater from the sanitation, 100% of the non-reclaimable wastewater, and purifying, recycling it, putting it back into the basin as a source of supply for the county. And we are the largest potable reuse project in the world. Next slide. The process: microfiltration, removing the bacteria, protozoa, suspended solids in the water, followed by reverse osmosis, which I refer to as the workhorse of the treatment process. The RO removes any dissolved minerals, viruses, or pharmaceuticals in the water. We will get some low-weight molecular organic or low-weight carbon compounds that do get through the RO, and those are treated by the UV light with hydrogen peroxide. So the final process uses direct photolysis and advanced oxidation to destroy really anything that's left in the water. By the time the water goes through this process, it's of near distilled quality. In fact, we have to add lime back in. We have to stabilize the water. If we put this water into a cement mortar line pipeline, it would leach the minerals out of the cement mortar lining. So we add lime, we get the mineral content back up, and then that water goes two places. It goes into our seawater barrier, which I mentioned before, and the remainder then is pumped from Fountain Valley to Anaheim. So we have a pipeline from Fountain Valley to Anaheim, which takes that water up to our recharge basins in the Anaheim Orange area. Next slide. Next slide. As far as the project funding, the original project cost $481 million. This was split equally between the Water District and the Sand District. We received $92 million in state and federal grants. We were fortunate, we caught a water bond, Prop 13 water bond, and received $67 million through that water bond, $20 million through the Bureau of Reclamation Title 16 program, and a $5 million grant from the State Water Resources Control Board. When we built the initial expansion, the project cost was $142 million. We didn't do so good. We only got $1 million in grant funds, but our board made a determination that we weren't going to wait around for grant funding to build the project. We needed the water. We proceeded building the project. The final expansion project cost $270 million. We have received $135 million WIFIA loan at a 1.03% interest rate and $9 million in grant funding on that project. Our costs are comparable to imported water. Currently, we're able to produce the water for about $700 an acre foot. All three projects receive state revolving fund loans, very important source of funding for these types of projects. As I mentioned, I guess the cost is $630. I said $700. And if you took all the grants out, it'd be about $850 an acre foot. Next slide. As far as the benefits, we're creating a new local water supply. We're reusing a wasted resource. We're increasing water supply reliability. That one really is key. Cost less than water for imported water from the Colorado River or Northern California. Uses half the energy it takes to import water and 1/3 the energy it takes to desalinate seawater. And what we're also doing is improving the quality of the water in the basin. So we're providing low TDS water that's commingled with fairly high TDS water. Over time, we will see that, and we are seeing that water quality. Next slide. So that ends my presentation. I'm going to pass it off to Dan Denham. Dan, take it away.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Dan Denham, I'm the Deputy General Manager at the San Diego County Water Authority. Let's go to the first slide. I wanted to give everyone sort of the same way that Mike did, an overview of our service area and what we do for the region. We are a wholesale water provider. We were created 77 years ago in 1944, although I'll tell you that our real history probably began with the most noticeable drought in Southern California, at least in many of our lifetimes in the early 90s, when it fundamentally changed the way we looked at water supply for the 3.3 million people in our $253 billion economy down in San Diego. We have 24 member agencies and 36 board members, and we provide about 75% of the water across the San Diego metro area, which, as you can see, stretches from Camp Pendleton to the north, all the way down to Mexico in the south. Next slide, please. So Connor touched on this a little bit in the intro from a Southern California perspective, but here's the Water Authority's profile in terms of really where the water comes from. The vast majority, of course, from the Colorado River. About 50% of that 66% is from our long-term water transfer with the Imperial Irrigation District and the efficiency-based conservation projects that we've done in partnership with IID and the Coachella Valley Water District in Riverside County. The remaining balance comes from what we purchased from Metropolitan in terms of the different blend of State Water Project and Colorado River supplies, which, as you can see there, that 10% is directly from Met. The 24%, it's largely surface water and our Carlsbad desal plant, which now provides a good drought-proof supply to San Diego, as well as other reuse projects that we're going to have coming online here. That 24% is expected to grow considerably over the next several years as potable reuse really takes center stage in the San Diego service area. Next slide, please. So we really believe that water conservation is hardwired into our residents. That was sort of the low-hanging fruit when we started our diversification effort. And really, we've been on that path for the past few decades in terms of a water conservation ethic down in San Diego. I mentioned our Colorado River supplies. This is largely, again, from the high priority, senior priority water rights that are associated with 277,000 acre feet worth of supplies off of the Colorado River. Of course, I mentioned the drought resilient desal water. All of this together, we believe that we're certainly good for this summer. We've sort of developed a tagline that San Diego has a drought-proof summer ahead of it. Going into the future, we do believe that we have reliable supplies for multiple years, which is quite different from where we were in the 90s. And if we can go to the next slide here, it really, when I said that our future or the Water Authority was created, although in 1944, this is what I meant by, I think we were really created in 1991, where we had to take a look in the mirror when the state was poised to shut off water. Not really too different than what we're experiencing today. We experienced a 90% cut to our agricultural community, and we got really close to a 50% cut to all of our supplies. So it really was this launching point that set the Water Authority down a path towards diversification. Some of those projects I mentioned, and really trying to get to a point where we had local control over our water future. Next slide, please. So unlike Orange County, we were not blessed with groundwater. You know, the last time that the Water Authority or the San Diego area was able to live off local water supplies, which, you know, includes groundwater, was in the 40s. So, you know, from the 40s to the 90s, we were largely an imported water agency. You know, we started off our diversification effort through conservation, like I said, sort of the low-hanging fruit and reclaimed water. But with the signing of the quantification settlement agreement in 2003, it was the long-term conservation projects in the Imperial Valley that really started us towards a path of true diversification. Those canal lining projects, we have rights to 77,000 acre feet of water well out into the next century, into 2112. And still what is the largest agricultural to urban water transfer in the US, the 200,000 acre foot transfer from the Imperial Valley to San Diego, sort of rounds out what is about 50% of our total supplies right now. The Carlsbad water, you know, 56,000 acre feet provides about 15% or so of our supplies, and everything is sort of rounded out with local surface water storage. The next increment of supply for the San Diego region is undoubtedly going to be potable reuse. We have a number of member agencies that are well advanced in their efforts to produce potable reuse water. We have Pure Water Oceanside, Pure Water San Diego, and a multi-agency project called the East County Advanced Water Purification Project. Certainly the future of water in San Diego. And I think that's all made possible because of the firm, reliable supplies that we developed over the past 20 years through the canal linings and the water transfer and desal plant. Next slide, please. So those are the supplies, but we are really cognizant of the fact that you know, it takes infrastructure to protect those supplies and get the water to our customers. We made a real effort over the past decade or so as it relates to storage. We have local surface water storage expansion at the San Vicente and Olivenheim dams, $1 billion worth of storage expansion. And over the past several years, we've embarked upon an emergency storage program that is in the $3 billion price range, which not only increased surface water storage capacity, but integrated our distribution system. Prior to the emergency storage program, we only had the ability to move water from north to south, and now we have the ability to move water north, south, east, and west. We have the ability to compartmentalize our system and really just better manage our operations. In terms of, you know, the future of water for the region, as I mentioned, being reuse, I think the future of our capital improvements program is really going to be pipe relining, and we're going to be pretty consistent over at least the next decade as that being the focus of what we do going forward with our CIP. Next slide, please. This is an interesting one. This appeared in the Union Tribune in April, and it's a stark contrast, you know, I think, between where our region was at in the 90s compared to where we're at today. Of course, local water, desal water, the supplies that we purchased from MWD, the pure water projects, the reuse that I mentioned, and then of course the Colorado River supplies. I think it really just sort of demonstrates what 2 decades worth of planning can do. Like I said, conservation is hardwired into what we do in San Diego. But in the end, what this took was ratepayer investment, and candidly, it was not cheap. And I think that there's a trade-off between investments that keep you out of drought and being prepared and methodical planning. And I think that that's kind of where we've been as an agency. Next slide, please. So Planning for tomorrow, I've mentioned all the reuse projects. I also think that, it's important for us to think beyond our own service area and our own borders. Storage in San Diego is in good shape. I also believe that we have the ability to work with the lower basin states and other California parties to perhaps keep some of the water in Lake Mead. Connor alluded to the fact that Lake Mead is at record lows. The lowest it's been since the 30s. I think if we start to look at our distribution system and our plumbing a little bit differently, I think we can better use all of our resources. In terms of planning for tomorrow, we do a lot of planning, as every water agency does, whether that's our water facilities master plan, our long-range financing plan. We have a regional conveyance system study that's underway, and of course, I mentioned our CIP. All foundational documents that kind of set our agency or set the compass as to where our agency wants to be heading into the future. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to end it with this here. This is just sort of a look at where we think we will be based on a lot of that planning that we do. In 2045, the Imperial Irrigation District water transfer and the canal lining projects, they are still going to be a big piece of our supply. That purple piece that you see, the 18% in potable reuse, will continue to expand. And then, of course, our Carlsbad desal water and the imported supplies that we purchased from Metropolitan. So we believe over the past 20 years, we've created a well-balanced, drought-proof portfolio. And again, like I said, that has to do a lot with conservation ethic in our ratepayers, but also a methodical investment in water supplies. That was my last slide, so I'll hand it over to Tracy.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Mike and Dan. Really honored to be on this panel with you and see all the great work that you're doing. My name is Tracy Quinn. I am the Director of California Urban Water Policy at NRDC and currently also managing our National Urban Water Team. NRDC, for those that don't know, is an environmental organization. We work on a broad range of issues from climate and clean energy to safe, affordable, reliable drinking water. And we've got about 700 employees working primarily in the US, but also working in Beijing and India and South America. And if you want to learn more about NRDC, you can go to nrdc.org. There's a lot of information about the work that we're doing. But today, obviously, we're here to talk about Southern California and our water reliability here. So next slide. Oh, I should also mention, since we are this, it's in partnership with Met, that I also have the pleasure of serving on the Metropolitan Water District Board of Directors representing the City of Los Angeles. So no doubt, Southern California is in better shape than the rest of the state right now. Our investments in water efficiency and local resources mean that we started the year with record levels of storage that will help us get through this dry year. But we don't know how long this drought will last and how long we need to make that storage last. So our best option is to start using water as efficiently as possible now so that we can stretch that water we have in storage. You can see from the graphs here that, the levels of storage throughout the state. You can see that, Southern California is doing slightly better. On the right side, pictures of Lake Powell and Lake Mead. As Connor mentioned, record low levels there. The governor, as Connor also mentioned, has asked for a statewide reduction of water in both the urban and ag sectors of 15%. And unlike the last drought, this is currently a voluntary conservation mandate or conservation order. But I wanted to note that just because the governor's order is voluntary, it doesn't mean that it isn't critical. I like to think of a situation we're in now as, you've lost your job and it's a bad economy So should we continue to spend our money like we had been when we had a regular income, or should we cut back? Obviously, the responsible thing to do is to cut back so that we can keep as much money in savings until we get a new job. Our plan, in past droughts has been to maintain, business as usual and pray for rain, or wait until we are in an absolute emergency to start ordering conservation. So I think that we need to learn from the lessons of our past droughts and start early. So the Colorado River Basin is experiencing, as Connor said, a 20-year drought. Lake Powell and Lake Mead are at record lows. Colorado will likely be in a tier 1 shortage next month. We must prepare for the possibility that this drought may be longer and more intense than the ones we have experienced in years past, and that we're going to have significantly less water available, despite the incredible efforts of water suppliers in Southern California to ensure reliability. Next slide. Obviously, there's also, a tie between water and energy. Our reservoirs also provide hydropower. Oroville, we've learned recently, is too low to produce hydropower. We're getting there. Same thing on the Colorado. So another great reason to save water is to keep the lights on. Make sure that we can continue having water in storage so that we can continue creating hydropower. On the right, I've provided some of the data from a study that was done during the last drought at UC Davis. So on the flip side of creating power, we know that water conservation actually saves more energy than even our state energy efficiency programs. So, as noted at the bottom here, during the last drought, we saved enough power. Let's see, oops, it looks like it's missing from my screen, but we saved a lot of power, so a lot of energy. So water conservation is an important tool, not only for maintaining reliability and affordability, but also to ensure that we're combating climate change. So it's both an adaptation and mitigation strategy. Next slide. As both Dan and I think Mike noted in their presentations, that we need to balance reliability and affordability. They've talked, both of my fellow panelists have talked about the incredible work that they've done to improve reliability in the region. And as we plan for a hotter, drier future, we need to consider the environmental impact, equity, and affordability when we're deciding how we want to achieve that reliability. These lenses can help us to prioritize our investments. Top of mind for many of us is affordability. Water is already too expensive for many Californians, and every year hundreds of thousands of households have their water shut off because they can't afford to pay the bill. And unfortunately, water is the only utility that doesn't offer a low-income rate assistance program. So when we make decisions about what projects to invest in to increase reliability, we need to think about the cost impacts of these projects to our low-income households. Next slide. This is a graph I've used often in my presentations. It's from the Pacific Institute, and it shows you basically the cost of a range of water supply and conservation measures. Obviously, there are a lot of pros and cons to each, but as you can see, water conservation is often the most cost-effective way for us to meet our supply and demand gap. It reduces demand, it can reduce utility bills. As I pointed out earlier, it reduces energy use. Stormwater capture has multiple benefits, increasing supplies, reducing pollution, can help create green space in communities, can reduce heat island effect. And then, we go to some of our more expensive supplies like recycled water and desalination. Obviously those are incredibly reliable sources. They're pretty drought resilient. I think Mike did a really great job of explaining all of the benefits of the incredible work that Orange County is doing with their groundwater replenishment system, and Dan talking about pure water. I know that's a project that many of us in the environmental community are really excited about. And then, there are other things that that are also resilient, but desal can also be incredibly energy intensive. It can have marine impacts, and it is incredibly expensive. Next slide. So we've done a great job here in Southern California, but other regions are doing better. And I just wanted to point out, this graph here. This is from the State Water Board's website. This is data from the self-reporting that water suppliers do every month to the state board. And we're doing pretty good. In 2021 so far, our residential per capita water use is 78 gallons per person per day. That's really incredible, considering that a lot of people are working from home. And so we would expect to see our residential water use be a little bit higher, but after a bump in 2020, there's a return to normal. I would point out on this graph that you'll see Central Coast, North Coast, San Francisco are all areas that are doing a little bit better. And obviously those are also areas that are generally cooler and wetter than Southern California. So, when you talk about the impacts of climate and weather on water use, a lot of that comes down to our outdoor water use. And that's a place that we can really continue to target and focus our attention so that we can achieve some of the improved the efficiency levels that we're seeing in other regions of California. Next slide. This is really just another graph to show you the impact of outdoor water use on our water demand. The peaks you see here are occurring in the summer. And that is primarily attributed to outdoor water use. There are a lot of benefits of reducing our outdoor water use. Obviously, one of them is reducing demand. Another one is that this type of variability, not knowing if next year is going to be hot or if next year is going to be really wet, makes it very challenging to do demand forecasting. Indoor water use is pretty easy. It's pretty consistent no matter where you are in the state. Indoor water use depends primarily on the age of housing and the age of appliances. It's not dependent on how hot it is outside. So if we can reduce our outdoor water use, that will dampen the oscillation we're seeing on this sinusoidal curve graph, and really makes demand forecasting easier. And when we can better project what our demand is going to be, we have a better sense of what our revenue is going to be, and that makes rate setting a lot easier as well. So there are a lot of really good reasons for us to focus our water conservation and efficiency efforts outdoors. Another reason being that as it gets hotter and drier, as we know it will, outdoor, it's going to take a lot more water to keep our thirsty landscapes alive. And so the more effort we can focus on that now will help it to really reduce our water use going forward. Next slide. And when we plan for our future, we have to figure out what our values are, because our water use doesn't just affect us. The choices that we make for what our landscape is doesn't just affect how expensive our water is. It also affects the environment. This year, we have seen California salmon be completely wiped out because of diversions from our rivers, because we haven't been able to keep enough water behind our dams to ensure that the temperature is appropriate. We are cooking our salmon in the rivers because of our water use. So when we're thinking about the future and we're thinking about, how do we build more infrastructure so that we can maintain the lifestyle that we've become accustomed, so that we can keep our lush lawns green, so that we can plant things that probably aren't appropriate for our current climate and the climate we're going to see going forward. Is my lawn more important than these salmon, than the health of the river, than the health of the people that depend on salmon fisheries? those are the value choices that we need to make going forward. Next slide. So what should we do? This certainly is not an exhaustive list of all the things that I think that we should be doing, but just, kind of an easy checklist, some of my top priorities that I think that I'd like to share today. One, I think that we need strong conservation messaging, consistent conservation messaging throughout the state. During the last drought in 2014, Governor Brown asked Californians to save 20%. It was a voluntary ask, just like we're in now. And we responded by saving 8%. We reduced our water use by only 8%. That led our governor to change that to a 25% mandatory reduction in water use. And we achieved that pretty quickly. Californians responded. Now, there's a lot of debate going on right now about why the mandatory call was so much more successful than the voluntary one. Was it because once it became mandatory, people took it more seriously? Was it because it strengthened the messaging? Metropolitan had a really incredible messaging program. A lot of our local water suppliers here in Southern California did as well. The state put a lot of money into messaging. So I think we can't underestimate how effective good messaging can be, as well as providing very easy and realistic tips for people. And some of my favorite tips are to fix leaks. I'm not immune, or I'm guilty of this one. I had a toilet that was running for quite some time. I live in an apartment building. I had reached out to my landlord on several occasions asking for someone to come and take a look at it and fix the running toilet, or to replace the toilet. I finally resorted to providing a lengthy email with the cost benefits to my landlord about his water bill, and the impacts of my leaking toilet on that bill, and was able to get it replaced. So sometimes, excuse me, motivating our customers to have the information they need to convince their landlords, motivating households on the benefits of things like fixing their leaks in their household are really important, giving them the tools to do so. Things like Flume are great. Other products where we can allow people to have access to their water use and to be able to be notified when they have leaks. Telling people, stop irrigating non-functional turf. Peter Glick had a great tweet that I retweeted that I've shown here, Western Water Tip. If the only time a human steps foot on the lawn is to mow it, it's time to get rid of it. This is a lovely picture I took in my neighborhood when walking my dog, showing that, there's a lot of over irrigating as well on our landscapes. I think that, messaging about the need to, the impacts of over irrigating as well. These can cause mosquito issues. There are slip hazards. That runoff going into our storm drain system is a huge source of pollution. I'm sure all of you on this webinar have called it urban slobber. So there's a lot of good messaging we can do to help people to irrigate appropriately. And now is the time. Get people to replace inefficient plumbing fixtures and appliances. We know that during droughts, when these stories are in the newspaper every day, when they're on the news, that people want to know what they can do. So having access to rebate programs, knowing what's available, knowing what actions they can take are really helpful. We really need to capitalize now on the attention that this drought is getting. We also know that we have a once in a generation potential for state and federal funding. Much of that, or quite a bit of that, could be going to water use efficiency. So, really now is the time to make sure that we have programs in place and that we are encouraging our customers to take advantage of them. In the near term, like I said, increase the funding for water efficiency. I'm hoping Met will once again bring back its larger budget for water efficiency, making sure that we can get money out to get people to tear out their turf. One thing I'd also like to see is to ensure that low-income customers can participate in water efficiency programs. Low-income customers pay into these programs, but often don't get to reap the benefits because they can't afford the upfront costs of purchasing new appliances or doing the landscape remodel before they receive the funding, waiting the 3 weeks or 3 months to get their rebates. So, we really need to make sure that our low-income customers have programs that are, that they're able to access. Hopefully there will be some dedicated funding for that from the state so that folks that are concerned about Prop 218 issues can make sure that their customers can take part. And then, what's next? Hopefully this isn't too long-term, but I know I'd certainly like to see us ban non-functional turf. Las Vegas has done it, and I think we can look to them to see how that goes, how they implement it, how they get folks to remove the existing non-functional turf, particularly in commercial spaces, but also in the residential sector. And we also really need to start enforcing our existing water conservation laws. There's a less than 50% compliance rate with just reporting on how cities are implementing the Model Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance. There's no real teeth in SB 407, which required the replacement of all inefficient plumbing fixtures in residential and commercial buildings by 2019. Obviously, there's a lot of work to do there. So really just making sure that we're all enforcing the laws that are already on the books. We've done some good work here in California. Now we just need to enforce those rules. Last slide. And I just wanted to talk about the benefits of doing water conservation and efficiency now when there's so much attention, when we're in the midst of this drought. In addition to improving reliability, affordability, equity, and environmental impacts, can also help you meet your long-term water efficiency targets. The state is in the process right now of setting water use efficiency standards for every urban water supplier in the state. And taking advantage now, tearing out as much turf as we can now are going to help water suppliers to meet those long-term targets. So I hope that we can all join together. I'm wearing I don't know if you can see it, my One Water pin that I got from Met's new GM, Adele Hajj-Khalil. We're all in this together in Southern California. We've done a really good job of improving our local reliability. There's still so much more we can do, and we'll get a lot further if we work together. So thank you all for allowing me to participate today, and I guess I'll turn it back over to Connor to facilitate the Q&A.
Thank you, Tracy. Great presentations, everyone. Actually, it goes on to Dee now to do the Q&A. Dee?
Thank you, Connor. Thank you, Tracy and Mike and Dan, for your presentations today. This is really great. And I'm starting to see the questions come into our queue now. If I understood Connor in the beginning, Tracy, do you need to leave? And do we need to make sure we're handling questions associated with your presentation first, or will you be here till 1:30?
I got someone to cover the first 30 minutes of my next meeting, so I will stay till 1:30.
Okay, great. Then I'll ask these in the order that they have been either endorsed or asked. And we're going to go ahead and start with a question from Diane Wallace. And she's asking about landscaping, if this is really an issue. Will Metropolitan and member agencies consider offering more money for replacement of grass? So since you're a director on our board, Director Quinn, do you want to take a shot at that first? And I'm happy to help a little there.
Sure. Yes, landscape is an issue. We still use about half of our drinking water to irrigate our landscapes here in Southern California. There are no current plans for Met to increase the pot of money available, but I certainly am encouraging Met, my fellow board members, to support Met increasing that budget just like we did before, and providing both financial resources and technical resources to our member agencies to be able to try to get that money out. I'm also advocating at the state and federal level for additional funding for these types of projects. So it's really crucial to our long-term reliability and climate resilience. There's just no way for us to maintain affordable water for Southern California going forward if we keep irrigating turf here in Southern California at the level we are now.
Thank you. And I'll just add that we are evaluating all of our conservation programs right now to see what opportunities we have, as well as our education programs. And we are advocating for funding at the state and the federal level to try to get matching funds that will help us extend our programs, because we do have a limited pot of funding right now, but we're also hoping to address that too. So let me go on to the next question then, unless Dan or Mike, did you want to say anything about incentives while we have the question in front of us, turf removal or other incentives?
No, I just want to totally agree with what Tracy said as far as outdoor water usage. That's really where I think the focus needs to be. I think we've shown over the last, I forget what it is, like 30 years with increasing population, our water demands have remained fairly level. A lot of that is attributed to doing a really nice job on the indoor. I know about 20 years ago, we were replacing toilets left and right, and now it's written into law that new housing has to have low flow toilets. So that's certainly a step in the right direction. I think we've done a great job, but we just absolutely have to cut down the water usage outside the house.
Yeah, I would agree with Tracy and Mike. I think what's going to be interesting to monitor over the next couple of years is going to be residential development and parcel sizes. And parcel sizes, I believe, are naturally going to become smaller, which would normally just reduce outdoor water use based on the size. So we might get there eventually, regardless of any additional policies that we do. But agree with Tracy and Mike.
I'm going to, Jan, kind of pivot off that question because there is a question here from Lauren Smith about seeing all the time from community members why new developments keep getting approved when we're in a drought while requiring existing water customers to cut back on their own water use. And can the panel speak to planning and the consideration of these sorts of new development projects?
Yeah, I think a lot of that is being developed with the new standards, the AMWELO standards that prescribe the type of landscaping for new developments. I think they're also, as I mentioned before, looking into, low flush toilets inside the house, energy saving, water efficient types of devices. I think also, I think moving forward into the future also, I mean, we're going to see maybe more vertical type housing. And as Dan kind of alluded to, that should help reduce water demands and that there won't be as much outside irrigation necessary for the number of people in that certain, footprint for that development. So I think that there is a very careful watch at the state level to develop regulations to help make sure that we are more water efficient moving forward in the future.
Yeah, I'll just add to that, on top of having a water scarcity issue in California, we have an affordable housing crisis as well. And so we know that we're going to be building new housing. And it does present an opportunity to build really water efficient new housing that will help to reduce our per capita water use, not necessarily our total water use, the total water demand. There are things like net zero or water neutral development ordinances that some cities have put in place. So if you're going to build a new development, you need to offset that water use somewhere else, usually through water conservation in existing buildings or on existing parcels. And there are things that can be done to, to offset that new development. But in order to make sure that we have affordable housing for Californians, we've got to find that balance. There are laws on the books. I'm trying to remember the numbers. I think it was SB 221 or SB 60 or 61. It was from quite some time ago. There new developments, there need to do a water supply assessment to demonstrate that there is enough water locally in order to meet the demands of that new development. I don't know that those have ever been successful in preventing a new development, but it's something that we could look to try to ensure that we are encouraging smart growth.
Dan, did you want to offer anything there? And do any of the panelists want to talk about growth and new demand? It doesn't just come from the residential side, it also comes from business. And I know there's a lot of concern about the economy coming back and ensuring that municipal and commercial businesses are able to operate.
I'll just add on to a little bit what Tracy was saying. I think it's really hard to operate from a baseline of zero growth. And I think that's why we have statutes in place to ensure that water is available for that new growth. I think the real tough nut to crack is what's that next incremental supply and what's it going to cost? Because in many ways, I think that it is about affordability. And in many ways, at least in Southern California, that next increment of supply is the most expensive source of supply, whether you're talking about desal water or reuse water. So that's the real conundrum, as we all know, with water affordability in Southern California.
Thanks, Dan. And actually, this next question is for you, Dan. So I'm going to go ahead and move to Raghu Sarabatia. I hope I said that name correctly, and I apologize if I didn't. And the question is, great turnaround from the 90s to today. How does the cost of desalinated water compare to imported water? And also, will you be looking to direct potable reuse projects?
Yeah, it's almost like I answered that last question in anticipation of this one. Desal water is expensive. There's no way of getting around that. It's expensive water and it's energy intensive, right? I don't think that anyone walks away from that. It's about $2,800 an acre foot for the water, and I think that's a pretty good number across the board, whether you're looking at other projects in California and elsewhere. Reuse, perhaps it's a little bit less, but nonetheless it's expensive water. And yes, a number of our member agencies are looking into reuse, big reuse projects that are going to be more expensive than traditional imported supplies. So I guess as an agency, you kind of weigh that against reliability and local control, and I think that's how you gauge and whether or not your customer base is ready to pay for something like that. But like I said, I think that all of the cheap supply outside of just conservation, it's gone, I believe.
Yeah, I'd like to throw in on this one also. I think too often we try to put everything into like a one size fits all, and it's not one size fits all. It's very different in different parts of the state. As an example, in Orange County, we're blessed with this huge groundwater base, and I think it was mentioned before. And so it was kind of a no-brainer for us to go into potable reuse because we had a place to store the water. As a result, our unit cost is much lower than, say, San Diego's Pure Water project. We have the benefits of economies of scale also in building a up to 130 MGD plant. So the unit prices are going to be all over the map depending on what that local situation is. I mean, Met is looking at developing 150 MGD. I haven't heard any word of that yet. 150 MGD plant in Carson. At a cost of $3 billion, I think is what's kind of out on the street right now. As is LA City San and DWP. I mean, they're looking at recycling all the water from Hyperion. And those are going to be very expensive projects. And so yeah, we have to look at what makes the best sense for our particular little spot in the world, and make a judgment as how we can best build that water supply portfolio that Dan showed us in San Diego. And I kind of briefly alluded to for us as far as stormwater capture and recycled water, and those type of things. So it's not that one is bad or one is good, some are better. And we have to make that determination as what fits best for us.
I'm going to move on to a question. I'm just going to skip over. There was another question for you, Dan, but I think it's a quick answer, just the sense that there was a question about whether you're going to use groundwater replenishment as part of your options for storing water. But we didn't really touch on this, but your groundwater basins are very limited in the San Diego area, right? So this is one of the challenges.
Right now we're probably 3 to 5% of our total regional supply is groundwater. Now, arguably, there's opportunities in the South Bay, in the southern part of our service area, who are really blessed with relatively large groundwater basins. The problem is it's a recharge issue. We have very little rain in San Diego, so that's one. But the other thing is to develop some of those plies. We're talking about developing a brackish water desal, which again gets to the cost of water. So I think there's opportunity to double that. We can get from 5 to 10%, but it's going to take, like everything, the willingness to spend money to develop the supplies.
Thanks, Dan. And before we kind of switch topics, going back to you, Mike, there was a question from Grant Hogue asking about the value of the GWRS reliability in dollars per acre foot for your customers versus, and then this says the less reliable Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. I will take an exception to that, but I want to say it because it was the way question was asked. But there's a question about the reliability versus imported water supplies, but also in the dollar per acre foot. Could you respond to that?
Yeah, and of course, recycled water is more reliable than Met water. I'll say that. Although Met, I mean, if you look at the State Water Project, the big swings on the State Water Project, and Met has done an outstanding job of building up storage. I mean, they're able to come through with a 5% allocation year because you have 3.2 million acre feet of water in storage. So you're managing that supply, outstandingly. I think in the long run, I can make this statement, our recycled water will never cost more than Met water. And I can say that because we have control over our water. Our cost of water in the early years was flat for the first 8 years, and it's increasing now because the cost of our final expansion, I went through it so quickly, you probably didn't even notice, but it's like twice what the initial expansion was. And the reason is we're recycling all of the water at the sanitation's plant in Fountain Valley, which we thought we'd always have enough supply from that plant to supply all the recycled water we would need. But that's not the case. We're having to go down. They have a second plant along the coast, and we're having to build a pipeline, build a pump station, pump the wastewater from their plant along the coast up to the one in Fountain Valley. And so that's causing the unit price to go up. As I mentioned, we'll end up about $850 an acre foot, or about $800. I didn't mention that, but we'll be about $800 an acre foot by the final expansion. That'll be our cost of water. And so compared to Met water, will be lower. Plus, we believe moving into the future, our increase will be lower than than the increase to Met water. Over time, Met's going to develop these projects. It's going to be more costly for them. So in our case, we will always be, the cost of our recycled water will always be lower than the cost of that water.
And just to further your point, Mike, about everything's local and it depends on the situation. The new supply that Metropolitan's looking at in the Regional Recycled Water Project is about double that cost if that project's approved by our board and is brought online.
Yep.
So it really does depend on the location, the pumping, et cetera. And Tracy, you had a chart in your presentation that you used from Peter Glick that showed this range of costs for these different supplies. I don't know if you want to address that at all, but there's a reason there's a range, and it's not just an average that we show on these graphs.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, I mean, certainly there are a lot of factors that contribute to the cost per acre foot of different water productions. You know, as Mike pointed out, you have, you know, the size of the facilities can contribute, the type of water that's coming in, the quality of the water that's coming in. Mike and Dan might be better equipped to answer this question, but you know, certainly there are a lot of factors that play into that range of costs.
I think we have to be careful about cost also. I mean, we need to, obviously we need to look at what the cost is, but that same graph you just spoke of or referred to, Dee, had negative costs for stormwater capture or building stormwater type projects. And I've seen other numbers that have that more costly than recycled water, depending on the type of stormwater project that you're doing. And, you know, our stormwater is free because we're working with the Corps to store water behind a dam during the winter time and then slowly release it downstream so that we can capture it. But the challenge with stormwater capture is it has to rain in order for it to become effective. And the problem with stormwater capture is when, with climate change, we're getting stronger storms that are occurring. So for us, even with a dam, a reservoir, if the rainfall comes down, you know, in a very large fashion, the Corps has to release that water at very high flow rates that we cannot capture downstream. And the same is true with any type of stormwater project. When it rains, it pours, right? That's the old adage. And it's more evident now with climate change than before. The secret to stormwater is capturing the water and then being able to release it at a rate that you can capture later on. So, I mean, just a couple comments. I didn't mean to go off on stormwater.
Well, just on that note, I'm glad you brought that up because I think it's important to remember there's all different types of stormwater capture projects. And we're really lucky here in LA where we've passed Measure W. So we have some dedicated funding to address stormwater. You know, as I'm sure many of you on the call know, stormwater is currently and has been for quite some time the largest source of pollution to our beaches and oceans here in Southern California. And so, you know, you get multiple benefits, as I mentioned earlier, from addressing stormwater. You have large projects like you've done in Orange County. There's also small projects, parcel-sized projects, you know, working with homeowners to keep stormwater on their landscapes with rain barrels or grading. You know, the City of Los Angeles passed an ordinance that in order to take advantage of our turf rebates, you have to use the watershed approach and keep a certain amount of rainwater on your property. That can help to slow things down and address some of the issues that Mike talked about, as well as, you know, really, you know, making our landscapes a much more useful climate resilient tool.
Thanks, Tracy. Dan, we've got a question for you from John Earl, and he's asking about the issue of having a glut of project costs plus the long-term debt and increased rates and water, all while San Diego County per capita has dropped and actual overall supply needs lag behind official projections, especially now that you can buy 100,000 acre feet of cheaper water from Metropolitan in a year per the lawsuit victory ? So I don't, the question mark I think is the overall question, but I think you probably have a couple comments there.
Yeah, I think that, you know, the lawsuit victory with Metropolitan, that reduced the cost of the water temporarily. Yes, in the future, that remains to be seen. And in terms of the cost of the water, right now, if you take a look at, you know, the cost of our QSA supplies, the quantification settlement agreement supplies, this 280 or so thousand acre feet, it's not like we pay one cost for those supplies, right? Some of it's $600 water, some of it's $150 water, some of it's $20 water. You meld all that cost into one, which I think is a, you know, cost of service-based approach that we all do in melding our sources of supply. And that cost is very competitive. I believe it's less than Metropolitan right now on a supply basis, but nonetheless, it's not necessarily cheaper. And it is tied to some pretty high priority senior water rights on the Colorado River. But, you know, in terms of the infrastructure investment, kind of like what I was getting at in my presentation, it is the backbone of our county. And, you know, we've never shied away from big, bold investments, or that's raising a dam to, you know, increase surface water storage or building a desal plant, which, you know, by the way, San Diego ratepayers didn't pay any upfront capital on. A private investor came in, and we have a water purchase agreement with them. So, you know, I think in the end, like kind of what Mike was saying, you weigh all of your options, and cost isn't always one of them in every case. But, you know, nonetheless, in Southern California, I think having more supplies is better than being in a situation where the administration comes down and says you have to cut 15%, and you don't have 15% to cut.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Let's go ahead and move to a question by Cynthia Jackson. And she's asking, has any consideration been given to replumb toilets to use recycled water instead of potable drinking water? Tracy, I know your organization and you have been involved with different studies on this. So do you want to take that question?
Sure. Yeah. Yes. You know, this is a concept that people have looked at. You can buy toilets right now where the bowl part is actually the sink. So when you wash your hands, that water fills the tank and then the toilet. There is, I believe, an IAPMO standard for other in-bathroom gray water reuse, where the water from the faucet and the shower can be plumbed to the toilet in an individual treatment unit. And, you know, San Francisco is doing a lot of large scale on-site reuse, you know, doing large commercial buildings where they have a treatment unit in the bottom and then can re-plumb that up to use in the toilets. That gets a little bit trickier when you're using recycled water from outside, from multiple users. There's, you know, water quality and health issues that come into play. If you were going to, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to, say, use purple pipe, use non-potable recycled water from a large municipal treatment plant to offset our toilet water because the dual plumbing issue, or, you know, having to have two delivery mains out to each toilet really takes away from any cost savings you would have. But there are a lot of people looking at different ways to reuse water on site in smart ways to reduce the use of drinking water to flush our toilets, which I will agree with the notion of that question, that is an inherently wasteful use of highly treated drinking water.
Thanks, Tracy.
Although I would say taking a 10-minute shower is even worse because most of our low flush toilets are only about 1.2 gallons of flush right now.
That's true. I mean, back in the about in 2011, there were studies done that showed about 27% of indoor water use came from toilet flushing alone. I imagine that's improved quite a bit as we have more efficient toilets, although California did pass new standards for shower heads. And I got to tell you, Mike, it takes a while to rinse conditioner out of a long hair. So we do our best to keep our showers short, but there are extenuating circumstances sometimes. So.
And I think the numbers have changed, Tracy. I thought I saw some numbers were now just out of the toilets about 10%. People forget, and I've got a slide in one presentation of what goes into the sewer. A lot of times I think it's just the toilet water, but it's from all the faucets, it's from the shower, it's from the washing machine, it's from the dishwasher, it's from all these different sources of supply. So using energy efficient appliances helps with the conservation as well inside the house.
One thing before we move on from this, I think, gray water gets a lot of attention. It's a really interesting idea, thinking about how you can reuse water on your own property. But I think it's to think about something to balance. If you live in an area where your wastewater is going to, a treatment plant where it's being recycled and into drinking water, then it might make, something like gray water and on-site reuse might make less sense than it would elsewhere, where that water is, simply being discharged to the ocean and providing no beneficial use. So
thank you for saying
to
that.
Mike's point of a time and a place for different options, something to consider.
Tracy, you would be so proud of me because I purchased a $2 hose bib that I hooked up to the back of my washing machine, and it waters my grass.
That's fantastic. I participated in a volunteer project where I got to install a laundry to landscape gray water diversion system, and it was really simple, I have to say.
Very simple.
Tracy, we have another question for you that's coming from Diane Wallace. It's really for any one of you, but it goes to your comment about low-income ratepayers and water debt. And she's asking, could water agencies consider reducing water costs to incentivize lower water use? And then a question about, have any thoughts been given to rationing water rather than cutting it off to water users? So would one of you talk about a little bit about what we actually do since we don't cut off water, what the mechanisms are? Thank you.
Sure. First I'll start with low-income customers generally use water more efficiently to start with. So, setting price points isn't necessarily the right tool to reduce water use in that sector. As far as, alternatives to water shutoffs, water shutoffs are used broadly throughout the state to recover utility debt, to recover water debt. People's water can be shut off for as little as, $15 in some places. So, and I think it's really heartbreaking. It's, whether you consider, it really comes down to whether you consider water to be a commodity or whether, we really truly have a human right to it and it's a public resource. I obviously endorse the latter. There are agencies that are looking at alternatives. East Bay Mud is considering, rationing water, reducing down to, I believe, 0.5 gallons per minute for customers that have utility debt. Excuse me. I don't think that is a more humane option. If you can imagine trying to fill the bath of your child at 0.5 gallons per minute, how long it would take and how cold that water would be once you got that tub filled. There are better alternatives out there. I think, there's been legislation brought forward to try to get require low-income rate assistance for our low-income households in California. I would love to see more water suppliers support that kind of legislation to make sure that we have programs in place so that everyone continues to have access to safe and affordable water in California. Some water suppliers do provide some type of rate assistance to their customers. Some have, we're still have a moratorium on shutoffs, but that is about to end. And as the graph I included shows, we have a mountain of debt out there. Hopefully, we've got $1 billion coming to help the utilities recover some of that debt. But the problem is huge and will continue beyond the pandemic and beyond the water shutoff. So we really need some long-term strategies in place, and hopefully, our water suppliers will join in the fight to make sure that we have mechanisms in place. There have been studies done showing that utilities that allow for partial repayment actually have more revenue recovery than those that use shutoffs. I'd like to see those studies expanded, and hopefully utilities will, again, will join in the fight to make sure that there is some sort of low income rate assistance for our customers.
Yeah, there are many agencies that are working to pass legislation, particularly at the federal level right now. And I want to thank you, Tracy, for understanding that question, because I misread it, because I was saying there aren't shutoffs, because I was assuming it dealt with our conservation strategies as opposed to other challenges. So thank you for answering that. We have 4 minutes left with our program, so we're going to take one last question, and I'm going to ask all of our panelists to agree, if you would, that we will provide you with these Q&A, these questions, and if you can provide answers after the fact, we'll post them on the Southern California Water Dialogue website. But I want to leave Connor a minute to close. So the last question that I see here is water. This is from Shelley Posner. And is water conservation a financial conflict for water districts? Where the sewage bill is based on the water bill, does water conservation also create an issue for wastewater charges? So Mike, you might be the best one to jump in here on this question. And if we have another second, maybe we'll get one more in, but I wanna give you time to talk.
I don't know why you think I'd be the best one to answer that one, Dee.
Because you work so closely with the Orange County Wastewater District.
Well, we do. Our funding, of course, is different, but no, I don't think that it's a conflict at all. Tracy mentioned earlier that she's wearing her One Water pin, and that Adele had given her. And I think we have to do a better job as a water community in being able to message that to our customers, and try to look at what we pay for water or stormwater or wastewater in the context of total water. And I think once, if we can articulate that, if we can explain that, then I think hopefully those types of questions will go away. But it really is about educating our public as to what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Dan or Tracy, did you have any parting thoughts you wanted to offer? And then again, if you would, please help us respond to these questions after the program today.
Sure. I mean, I just want to reiterate what Mike said. I think water conservation does not have to be a conflict for water districts. I think a really important element to that is to really improve our demand forecasting. We've seen throughout the state, some utilities regularly overestimate demand because they have underestimated improvements in water efficiency and conservation. And again, like I said, as we continue to encourage people to tear out their thirsty lawns and replace them with climate appropriate landscapes, that will help to dampen the effect of that variability and allow for better demand forecasting. But that demand forecasting will really help water suppliers to set their rates based on how much they're actually going to be able to recover, and that will reduce the conflict there between water conservation and revenue. And again, it's really a value. It really comes down to what our values are. Is water a commodity, or is water a human right? And I think that there is growing consensus that water is a human right, and it's really important for us to use less of it, maintain affordability, and think about the impacts of our investments on the environment and on equity.
Dan, I see you shaking your head yes, so I'm going to assume that's your final comment. Okay, and then Connor, I'm turning the program back over to you. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dee, and I want to thank all of our speakers today for the great presentations and the perspectives, answering questions as well. I said we wouldn't resolve all the issues here. As we speak, the upper Feather River, the high mountain sponges that capture water in those meadows are burning in the forest around them in Plumas County, which feeds into the Sacramento and feeds into the Delta and brings some of the water we get south. The Colorado River is in the 20th out of 22 years of severe dryness, or it can't be called drought if it doesn't end. So we need to continue to plan for the driest day plus fire and consider the equity issue. And I'll leave you with a radical idea that we provide the basic human right to water for health and safety at a free level. This is going to bring up a big 218 discussion for further, but we're really looking to the future, how water agencies have changed and adapt. We've heard in the ways that San Diego County Water Authority and Orange County have already. But as we move forward in the 21st century, how do agencies and people who are ultimately the ones that save the water, and we have to include the commercial, industrial, and institutional efforts that have been made as well, how do we adapt and change? And we're beginning to do that, and the dialogue isn't over. We do not meet in August. Feel free to vacation safely and wisely, and we will be back September 22nd, same place and time, still on Zoom at this point. Everyone take care and be careful out there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.